Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the QT2 Systems Podcast 10 Tips to Crush Your Next Triathlon. In this series, we've been bringing you our QT2 coaches to talk about their areas of expertise. And today we have a hybrid topic, which is on race fueling. So we bring today our featured guest is Ann Rollins, and Ann is both a coach with QT2 and also a registered dietitian with the Core Diet. Welcome, Ann.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on. I mean, you've been around for a while in the sports nutrition area. You've seen a lot, some things that have changed, some things that always, have stayed pretty consistent over the years, seeing the good, bad, and the ugly. So looking forward to hearing from you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true, right? There's always change. There's always new things that come to market, or new techniques, new products, all of the new stuff. But there's always the same old that you see over time. So it's a good mix.
Yeah. It's funny. I started racing triathlons now, God, 25 years ago. And I remember back in the day, really the only sports nutrition was the old like power bars, those really like chalky
Right.
old
You
bars,
couldn't open them, right? The
Now,
packages you couldn't open.
right, the package is right. And now, God, so much has changed over there. And there are so many choices out there, but there are some fundamentals that are going to apply no matter what. So I think we'll take some time and we'll go through those. But I'm going to start out first. Like the subject today is race fueling. So generally, what is race fueling? What are we talking about here?
Yeah. So we're talking about making sure that you have enough fuel to get through your race, right? It's kind of like, right there in the title. And I think that a lot of times what I find is that people don't actually know what race fueling is. They're like, "Oh, well, I've got to fuel my race." Okay, that makes sense. But what actually is that? What works and what doesn't work? And I'm looking forward to getting into those kind of details as we talk about it. But your race fueling is not just your race. We have to talk a little bit about what you're doing before the race, and we have to talk about how you practice that prior to your race, right? We always say nothing new on race day. So you can't just show up and I've had sort of, newcomers, like, oh, I'm saving, this extra, whatever for, race day. It's going to give me that extra zing. And, I strongly recommend nobody ever do that with anything, right? With your training, with your fueling, with your clothing. You want to battle test everything, and you definitely want to battle test your race fueling once we get it established.
Yeah, I mean, and even battle testing it too, but just getting through it, training. I mean, 6 hour training ride or something you're out there doing, you can't do that on water, right? So you
Right.
need,
I,
yeah,
and I've certainly been out. Some of the a couple of the guys that I train with around here. There's one of us in the group. We just always are like, listen, don't do it again, okay? We're like he's pretty firmly just was like, oh yeah, I know, and I just drank a half a bottle of water, and we're like, buddy, we're all like 3 Gatorade bottles, 2 goos, and a bar in, like, and it's we try to coach him and tell him what you have to do, and we're getting there slowly, but it really becomes a deficit because, as you're saying, if you're out there for 6 hours, I think, sometimes if you haven't done it before, you're like, well, 6 hours, I'm not going to feel great. Well, here's the thing. If you fuel your activity, you might feel okay. It's not just like, oh, I've been out here for 4 hours and I'm working hard, so I should not feel good. Like, this is what it's supposed to feel like. So if you have a solid, race fueling plan where you're hydrated, you've got, available glucose is kind of like the magic, right? That we use, like the liquid gold, right? Your glucose, what we're using for energy. If you have those things, you should be able to keep going and you should feel pretty good. And you should actually feel extra good because sugar is going to make you feel a little good, right? So when you start to get a little grumpy and moody, I always know, like, oh, did I miss something? Because I'm like, all of a sudden the way that my shirt is rubbing against me is annoying, right? So I'm like, oh, let me get some gels going on. Maybe that's the issue. So you do really want to make sure that you're hydrated, with sodium and electrolytes, not just plain water. With hydration. I don't know if you just want me to just kind of jump into it here, but I'll just kind of hit the hydration up front. I usually go through a teach with the athletes that I'm working with water's a big deal. Like, oh, I just drink water. I can't really tolerate, the sports drink or the sugars. It upsets my stomach. And we really want to practice in small amounts, get your gut used to that so that you can take it in. Because if you're unable to do that, you are going to wind up dehydrated on a long course. You're just sweating, and you're going to sweat out your electrolytes. You're going to sweat out your sodium. So what, a lot of times we forget is that we're sweating out that sodium. We always say, like, what's the big question is like, you're covered with like white stuff? Is your kit covered with salt and white? That's a really good sign you've lost too much salt. You have to put some back in. Our bodies are absolutely phenomenal at managing the dilution or the concentration of sodium in the liquid that's in our body, right? So when we have the sodium that's in our body and we add just straight liquid, the body goes, ooh, wait, too much liquid, sweat that out without a ton of salt, right? And we start to just get dehydrated. Everything we either sweat it out or it goes out in our urine. We just lose those fluids because the body wants to keep that regular. So we really do need to be repleting both of those things. We need to get fluids and we need to get the electrolytes in so the body retains the fluid that we put into it. So that's sort of, right off the bat, I would say hydration is key. That's going to get you first in a race fueling plan. If your hydration is not on, you're gonna start to come unglued, and not in a great way. If you've seen people who are not hydrated well, you really don't feel well, and your body's you're gonna lose balance. Not great, right? So hydration is definitely key. I would focus on that first, and then we start to get in those additional calories through glucose to just replete, your gasoline, your fuel.
Okay. So as I'm hearing you, you need to get in a certain amount of liquid. That liquid should have electrolytes in it. And then you need to get in your carbohydrates, your glucose. So how do you know how much you need? Is there like some general
Yeah.
guidance that you can give?
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's a great question. So when we do, we put together like specific race fueling plans for individuals, and we have them do a sweat test so that we can understand how much sweat, how much liquid they're losing per hour under certain conditions. And then we can figure out what we need to replete. So that works, ideally, right? We put it on paper and then we have somebody go out and practice that. So if you're not accustomed to, if you don't have a race fueling plan, if you're doing something shorter, and I would say, like, hands down 100%, no way should anybody be out on an Ironman course without a race fueling plan, right? I just think when we talk about nutrition, your race fueling plans, this is something that we can create, we can tailor it to the individual, and we can go out and practice it. We can tweak it so it's perfect. And then we can work with it. Like, okay, you're racing in warmer conditions. Let's upscale some stuff. Okay, not so much. We can down regulate some stuff. So we can really, really tailor it to you. So if you don't want to lose that. There's so many things that are out of your control on race day. Nutrition is something you can do. So I wouldn't just throw it to chance. And I have worked with a lot of people who have come to me after a couple of like not so great race turnouts and said like, oh, I came unglued at like, on the run, and really what it is, I'm like, you came unglued before you got there because you weren't hydrated and you didn't have that fuel. You didn't have that plan. So hands down, if you're doing an Ironman, I would invest some time into that, because you don't want to spend all that time training and everything to get yourself there to race day and then not have gas in the tank properly to get you through the day. It should be part of what you're doing as your race preparation, for sure, when you're on a long course like that. If you're on a shorter course and you're like, oh, maybe I don't really need that so much, I would definitely make sure you are taking in a sports drink. I like to say, like, if you're out running, probably taking, like a half bottle of Gatorade Endurance per hour. And, if it's warmer, a little bit more. And if you're finishing with salt all over you, a little bit more. Sometimes we need to, take an additional kind of salt tab, because if you're, on a run, if you're just doing a run course, there's only so much fluid you could take in where it gets a little sloshy, right? So we might just add some sodium into what you're taking in. But that would be like a rough estimate for somebody, like a half a bottle of Gatorade Endurance with the extra sodium in it per hour, as a baseline, right? That would be to start. On a bike, I would say minimal. We always say, like, no, never take in less than one bottle per hour on your bike. And then we'll go from there. How'd you finish up? Did you finish up caked in salt, or did you feel good? But minimally, we say that. And typically, we're going to be taking in some kind of solid food somewhere between every 30 to 40 minutes, whether it's a bar or a gel, depending on what we're doing. But we're going to do that like starting at like minute 0, right? Like that's when the clock starts. That's when we're going to start it. So, and we always talk about, people like, oh, I'm just going out to do like a 90-minute thing. I don't really take anything. And you know, to that, can you get through it? Sure. Would you maybe perform better if you fueled it properly? Yeah, you would definitely do better. And I always say, like, look, your training is going to be a lot stronger if you're fueling your training, which means your session is just more effective. So if you can get in the right nutrients, so you can stay hydrated, you'll be able to work, you'll be able to push a little bit more, you'll be able to hit your metrics that you're trying to hit for that particular workout. That's obviously better. You're going to show up to the next workout even stronger, as opposed to like you didn't really get that little extra percentage of training just from fueling, right?
Mm. Yeah. And so from the fueling standpoint, from the carbohydrate standpoint, I've heard like the ranges of 30 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour. That's pretty big range. So how do you figure out within that range? Is that, I mean, when you do a race fueling plan, is that part of it that you would recommend to someone exactly how much they should be taking in?
Yeah, that's the range, right? And so so if we're talking about triathlon, we, typically we've got some fuel prior. Maybe we'll talk about that in a minute, but you're coming out of the water. You probably haven't had anything. I know some athletes will tuck a gel up into their swimsuit, but for the most part, everybody gets through that swim, and then we're going to get onto the bike. So we're going to fuel your bike a little bit differently than we are going to fuel your run. And I always try to teach athletes to approach your bike as an opportunity to kind of catch up from that swim, right? We just used up some stuff, and we want to replete what we just used up. And we want to fuel our bike, right? Because we're working. And then we want to arrive to go out on our run ready to go, topped off. So because of that, we're going to likely take in a lot more fluid, which we can tolerate because we're not jumping up and down running, right? We're not, jostling around so much. So we'll take in a little bit more fluid per hour on the bike, and we'll take in more calories on the bike, just because we have that opportunity to do so. So we do get that range in there. And then we might take in a little bit less as we move into the run, just as what we can manage on the run. So that's one piece of that range. The second piece of that range is we might have athletes of different sizes. So we might have somebody who weighs 100 pounds. We might have somebody who weighs 200 pounds. And we're likely going to have a little bit more fuel going for somebody who weighs 200 pounds. They've got more muscle that we need to fuel than somebody that weighs 100. So we have, a couple of components that go into that. And that's kind of why you see that big range recommendation in there.
Okay. And that range recommendation might change too if they're doing something shorter versus something
Oh,
longer.
absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Exactly. Yes. Your distance, you don't have to, you don't have to be so ready for that, marathon at the end of an Ironman, right? Like, or if you're only doing a half, right? Like you've got, if we're getting ready to run a marathon, we need to be absolutely topped off and ready to go. We've pushed everything in that we can. But when we're doing shorter distances, right, we're going to back off of those totals a little bit because we'll be at the finish line sooner, right? So we don't really need to stay hydrated for X amount of hours. We don't need that extra carbohydrate for that. It's a shorter time.
Yeah. I mean, I went through this personally with you this year because I have been a short course athlete for a long time. And this year, last season, decided to do the crazy thing of do two Ironmans within 8 weeks of each other. And it was a huge learning curve because like on a sprint distance, I'm like, okay, that's an hour and 15 minutes. I drink a bottle on the bike, grab a gel, and there's not much to it, right? I mean, and if you mess up a little, it's not as big of a deal. And then it's like going to 70.3 and then going to the full. I'm like, how do I mean, I was getting to the point where I was taking in a bottle every 40 minutes and taking in like a lot of
Yeah, I
calories. And
recall. We went back
it
and we
like,
reviewed and revisited, and we're like, yeah, you're gonna
yeah,
push that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that was hard to get adjusted to, but it was so important to have the plan, to dial it in, to change it, to practice it, to get used to doing something, like
Right.
that. And then, of
Yeah.
course, with racing internationally, the nutrition changed too. And so then it's like, okay, well, we've got
Okay.
the numbers and now we have to switch the products around a little bit too. So it was a process, but I'm so like grateful to have
Yeah.
worked with you to go through that because I went in knowing what I had to do. And then it was on me to execute, like if I
Right.
got it.
And that, the execution phase too, I think, just a few things that you said there, it just kind of just reiterates, right? Like have that plan in place because you had the numbers, right? So we had a plan, we had the numbers, we knew what it was. Now we just need to like fit the product in there. Like if we didn't have the plan, now we're just sort of guessing, is this product equivalent to that product? And then so then the next piece of that is everything is magnified, on a long course, right? So you don't want to need to be thinking on the long course. I don't know about how your brain is functioning somewhere at like mile 18 on the marathon and an Ironman, but sometimes you're not thinking clearly. Like there's a lot going on race day. You've got other focuses going on, and I think trying to figure out like, wait, should I take a gel? Should I not take a gel? Or you don't want to do it. You want to just know like, okay, it's time, right? It's time. We work out systems, and I think we might have done this too, just like set an alarm or just something beeps so that and you don't miss it because there's a lot going on, and when you get to the end of a long course, you're a little cloudy. So it's not like you're just sitting there, and we're sitting here. I'd be like, oh well, I could just figure it out, and your brain is not the same, toward the end of the race too. So that's definitely a factor.
Yeah. And when you say set the time, I mean, that triggers too. Is like an Ironman isn't an Ironman, isn't an Ironman. I mean, sometimes the bike leg of an Ironman is if it's a flat, fast course, or in Nice, that bike course was a lot longer than, it just because of how difficult it was. You're out on there. So it's a time-based thing, right? It's
Yeah.
how
Mhm.
often do you fuel, not by time rather than by miles. I mean, you can ultimately, if it works better, you can jigger it the time into miles and know, okay, well, I need to eat every 10 miles on this course or whatever, it comes out to be. But I think that that's an interesting one too, that's another, you know,
It is, and I
modification
do,
that you need
yeah.
to make.
I do like to tell everybody time, because of exactly that. We don't really know. Like we know what a minute is. We know what 10 minutes are going to be, but we don't know what that mile is going to look like. We don't know what the weather during that mile. You might take a turn and all of a sudden you've got a headwind, or so there's different variables out there that we don't know about. So absolutely focus on the time and not the distance.
Mm. Okay, and then another thing that, I had to go through, like, okay, so my race plan originally was Gatorade endurance with the goos and cliff shots, like and I used that and that was fine. And then this year, Ironman changed, I mean, 2024 Ironman changed the race, both in the US and internationally. And now, and other race courses, they use different things. I mean, there's so many, as we said, there's so many different products out there. And so when Ironman went from Gatorade Endurance to Mortal, and then the gels that they use, the Morton gels, are not the same as a Cliff gel or a goo or, so many of the other products on the market. So how much do you do you recommend that people use what's on the course if they can, or like how
Yeah.
do you approach that situation?
Yeah, so that was definitely a monkey wrench. That was a lot of fun, going into last season to just sort of, you know, to kind of just rewrite things. And, like we said before, like, okay, we have the numbers. So, okay, let's see what we can plug in here and kind of shift it a little bit. But, I always recommend that we find out what's on your course, right? And if you can get to it, you should definitely be practicing it with it, because again, over the long course, if something is off, you know 20 milligrams of sodium, then in a short course, that's not really, might not be that big of a deal if it's not warm. But if you're on a warm course or a long course, either one of those things independently, it's going to impact that, and that's going to start to add up as you get further and further into the race. You're going to be in a deficit of your sodium. So or even carbohydrate, like some of the products that they that some of the products that you had, I think, were a little bit lower in carbohydrates. So we had
Yeah,
to kind of like
right.
increase, I think,
And
if I
precision
remember.
hydration, which is used in the international courses, like
Right,
those ones really got your carbohydrates from the solids, and then you got your electrolytes from the fluids, which then made it really important that you stay within the same product family. Otherwise
right,
you were,
right,
because the solids didn't have any electrolytes in them, and the fluids didn't have any calories in them.
right,
So it was,
right. And
you
it's
can
and
make the
it's
numbers.
it's frustrating but fun, because we
Yeah.
get to say like, okay, here's how we get to put this together now. And so exactly that, like, so we do want to get the product. And sometimes, what I will say, the only way I kind of like come away from this is if somebody's starts out training at the beginning of their season. It might not be super imperative that they have the exact product that they're training with at that time. And I didn't say product, I might want to say like flavor, or like gels that are similar. And the reason why I say that is because I've had some athletes come up with like a flavor fatigue, or some kind of fatigue where they get there and they're like, oh, I can't stand this anymore, and then they stop, or
Mhm.
they just start to decrease the amount that they're taking in because they're like, oh, I can't take it anymore. So if that's, and that doesn't happen to everybody, but it certainly does happen to some. So if that's kind of the case, then I would definitely recommend, like, okay, we'll find something that's comparable that you can start your season out with, start to train. But now the closer that we're going to get to race day, we've got to dial in, like, what are they using on the course? Let's get that sports drink if we can. And if you don't like the solids that they have available, you can carry them. I carry everything. I think no, because they did performance hydration, so you guys pulled it off the course. But I typically will carry everything with me, and then some, and then some, just to make sure. I've got stuff in my transition bags, and in fact, I did have somebody decide not to use the mortar that was on the course, and they mixed up what they'd been training with, and they used that on their bike, and they put the rest of it into their transition T2 bag so that they could take it out. We concentrated the bottles, so it worked out really well. That was very technical and also a very seasoned racer. So I don't know if I would recommend something to that degree if it was your first race. You've got enough going on on your first race to try to figure out concentrating bottles, but it is an option. As we're looking at products and how do we manage that.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always sort of taken the approach of, if you can drink what's on the course, try to drink what's on the course and then carry your solids. But with the monkey wrench, with Mortal, I had a hard time personally with the product. I know some people really like it. But that's, again, it's, if I didn't try it, I wouldn't have known, and where it's so important to try it and to know what's in it because it doesn't have the calories, the same calories that some other
Right.
products do. So if you walked into race day having practiced with Gatorade Endurance and then figured it was the same thing, it's definitely not. I mean,
That's a
so
big deal.
doing
And then,
your research.
yeah, and I think that might, it might inadvertently happen. I remember maybe like 15 years ago, one of the races, I think they offered regular Gatorade as opposed to Gatorade Endurance. And I don't know how clearly it was marked in the athlete guide, but I know I had a couple of athletes who ran into a little bit of trouble mid-course just because they weren't aware that it was not Gatorade Endurance, so that they didn't have great races. Fortunately, it wasn't terrible. They knew enough how to be like, this something's going on, and I think they were able to pull it out. But I think it was kind of an after the fact of like, oh, it turns out there wasn't, there was lower sodium content in that drink. So both of those things can be true, right? If that sodium content is lower, like I said, over the course, you're going to run a deficit. And if there's no carbohydrate in that drink, we need to make it up somewhere.
Yeah. And it is a numbers game though. Once you know what your numbers are, you can put it together in so many different ways, but you can't do that on the fly in a race if you don't know what you're dealing with. So
Right. Right.
just,
Yeah.
planning in
Yeah,
advance.
and it's like the numbers are shown, but that's why I say like just we always just like we do the sweat test. I understand, and the sweat tests don't really change, over years, right? Like I don't know, maybe we were kind of like, when would we redo it, right? Your sweat rates are kind of your physiology, and unless if you're a triathlete, like your body physiology is probably not going to change. Like maybe if you were maybe if you were like an O lineman in the NFL, and you're 6'7" and 350, and then you decided to take triathlon and drop 200 pounds, we might consider, there'd be some metabolic differences in your muscle mass and things, that the way your body was operating. But for most cases, like even if it's like, people like, oh, I dropped 40 pounds, we really don't see that much of a difference in sweat rates.
Mhm.
Um, and while I'm talking about sweat rates, I always want to say, like, you don't know what your sweat rate is. I've worked with athletes who are, bigger guys, and they have a lower sweat rate. You might look at them and be like, oh, I bet their sweat rate's huge. And it's really not. And then I have tiny athletes, and they just sweat. Like their sweat rate, they're dropping pounds per hour. And you would think it was the opposite. So it's not always, you're like, oh, you're a bigger, body, you probably have a higher sweat rate. It's not always the case. That said, once you have your numbers in place, it really doesn't change.
Okay. Now, we did talk a little though about how temperature can affect what you're supposed to do. So, because the sweat tests are normally done indoors, right? So,
Mhm.
whatever, 72 degrees or whatever you're doing it. So, what happens if you're racing and it's 40 degrees or it's 90 degrees? Like, how does that change what you're supposed to
Wow.
take in?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the heat first is, was a little bit more like, oh, okay, we're going to be sweating more in the heat. When we do a fueling plan, we write it to 85 degrees, right? So 80 to 85 degrees, here's where we're going to land. And then we're going to kind of tick that up 4 degrees over that, right? So we'll start to add to that. So we're taking in mostly more sodium, and a little bit more fluid, so that you're retaining that fluid on board, and just being a little bit more heat resistant, right? So the first thing that we can do in like thermoregulation is make sure that your hydration is on point. When you are a little bit dehydrated in heat, you're going to feel that heat magnify. So we want to make sure that you're hydrated. One, like that's the first line of defense when we're racing in heat. So we'll pick that up, or training, right? Whichever the case may be. I do remember there was like a heat wave when Ironman Texas used to be a little bit later in the season, and they were having a heat wave, and everybody was scrambling, and we're all like rewriting these race fueling plans for everybody going in. And I remember we're all like, oh my gosh, like this athlete is up to like 10 bottles an hour. Well, I've got, what is it, 12? Like, it was just insane amounts of fluid that we're gonna like push it. And we're like, oh my God, are they gonna be able to tolerate it? So Um, so, hopefully we're not in that. Now the race is a little bit earlier in the season, so maybe we won't see that again. But we will incrementally tick that up for heat. When you're racing in cold, this is kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Because our thirst mechanism is somewhat down-regulated because it's cold out and the air is typically more dry. And so because the air is typically more dry, we're probably going to be losing a little bit more than we think we are. So we already in our heads are like, well, I don't really need to be taking in as much fluid. It's colder out, but we're actually, we're losing stuff more than we think. And it's really easy to become dehydrated in the cold weather. So we want to kind of keep an eye on those kind of things. And like I said, we always want to have like our baseline that we don't go below. So when we're doing cold weather, I would make sure like we're not going below our baseline. We're here for sure. Make sure you get everything in. It's not, we have to make sure in both ways. Like it's too cold, we're forgetting to do it. It's too hot, we can't believe we have to drink so much, right? So
So,
both of those ends require a little bit of on the fly thinking. And as you mentioned earlier, it's like the execution of it, right? Like there is a little bit of, the more you practice, the more you understand how your body reacts to what's going on, the better, the more times you see something, the better you get at it, right? So the more times you can practice, the more times you get how you feel under certain circumstances when you're out on the race. And if you need to make an adjustment, your coach isn't out there, I'm not out there to be like, hey, I need you to, although sometimes I text I text spectators and I'm like, tell them to when they come by, take a gel, take a salt tab. So, but you want to learn, you want to know your body, you want to be able to make good judgment calls when you might be a little bit fuzzy out on the course.
so when you're training, I mean, you at least have the opportunity, you can weigh yourself before and after, like a ride or a run or something like that. Is there a weight, like how much is okay to lose?
Yeah, so you do not want to lose more than 2% of your body weight. Now you're going to start to see performance slide when we hit about 2% of loss. I I've been doing this for so long, and I know like during the summer I like will get on my scale with my fluids before I go out for my long runs, and I come back in after just to check myself to see like, was that a right adjustment in this temperature and at this intensity that I was working at. And I will absolutely be like arms up over the head if I come in like at exactly the same weight that I left at. Like it's hard to do. It's not something that you're like, oh yeah, I'll weigh the same. We're gonna sweat, we're gonna start to lose. So we don't want to lose more than 2%. That's gonna impact our ability. The body's just gonna start to shut down, right, as a survival mechanism. So we don't want to do that. So get everything in.
So when you weigh yourself before, you don't weigh yourself with all your bottles with you, do you?
I do. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, so
Okay.
this is a good, yeah, this
Oh,
is a
yeah.
good
Tell
tip.
me exactly how this
Yeah.
works. Because I weigh myself without the bottles and I still am
Yeah.
losing. So tell me how this, okay.
Yeah, so
So how
this
does
is
this
a
work?
good, I usually give this to athletes, like as a, if it, like, wow, like usually they'll come, we're going to do like a nutrition plan and then we're going to do the race fueling plan. We always do the nutrition plan first, and we don't want to just give the athletes so much information at one time. So usually when we do the nutrition plan first, they say, okay, we're going to get to your race fueling plan, but in the interim, I want you to do this before we do your sweat test. And so what I have them do is go to the scale. In an ideal world, it's, they're inside on their trainer, maybe it's winter, they're inside on their trainer, they're going to do an hour workout, ideal. And then whatever they're going to drink or eat during that session, I have them hold them in their hands, just whatever they're wearing, get on the scale, and weigh themselves. Note what that weight is. Go do your hour workout, and then come back with your empty bottles. Now, one of the dietitians who was my mentor. She was like, "Do you bring the wrappers with you?" like everything, right? So anything that, now that it's empty, just weigh with that empty stuff and see what the difference is. Because
Yeah.
now we know that water, we know what you were holding in that bottle went in. We want to know what came out.
Mhm.
Right, so we want to account for that weight. So let's say you do that and you get back on the scale and you're a pound down, you know that you need an additional 16 ounces to go in per hour. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And okay, so curious, what if you go to the bathroom in that time? How does that affect it?
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
thinking as to.
yeah, 100%. No. So again, ideally, you make it through the 1 hour, but we're also super hydrated that like maybe that doesn't happen, right? So, if you can figure out how much I work clinically, so I would probably be able to tell you the amount of cc's that I peed
Yeah.
out. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Just, many people probably wouldn't have that, in their back pocket, like, oh, that was 800 cc's, right? So, if you did like recognize that there's some additional fluids in there that we lost, right? That we didn't sweat out, we'd have to add that back in.
But, well, now it's because I used to live in Florida, as you know, and I'd go out on these bike rides and be so hot, and I'd weigh myself before and after having drank like, I mean, at that time, I don't know, let's say I went through 6 bottles in 4 hours, and I'd still come back not having weighed myself with my bottle, so just my basic body weight before and after, still having lost like 3 or 4 pounds, and that's like, yeah, that's incredible. That is, not counting the bottles, 2% of my body
Right.
weight. So
I'm like, I think I remember that phone call. I'm like, oh no, you're gonna need more.
I'm gonna need more. I'm like, how do I possibly get this all in? But so that's interesting.
Yeah.
That I mean, there's a way to measure it, way to see, and
Mhm. Yeah. And then,
okay.
like I said, those are kind of just like the quick and easy ways to kind of get a measurement on it. Ideally, we do want to do a sweat test, but if you're just, curious, you want to do a quick way, just, you're trying to have those two numbers match as best you can. And that's why I say, like, I would celebrate because it is super hard. Like, even you're like, I came back and I was, 3 pounds less or whatever. It is really hard to come back at that number, spot on. So do the best that you can is my advice. Aim for it. That's
Yeah. Okay. So now you've got it all dialed in. You get to the race, and sometimes it's perfect and it works out, but a lot of times you hit the run and you're like in the back half of the run, you're like, I can't handle this stuff anymore, right? So what do you do when you just like you can't tolerate?
Yeah,
What do you say?
I had a great situation. So I got a couple of tips for this scenario. So I I was in Placid and I was coming up the back half. This is just about, I don't know, maybe like the last, 5 to 7 miles on the bike. It was just getting a little steamy and a little hot. So I thought, you know what, I'm gonna push a little bit extra fluid here just because. And I thought I was really patting myself. I'm like, good job. Like, you're really pushing this fluid in. Like, this is great. And so when I racked my bike and I started out on the run, I'm like, oh, that was a mistake. My stomach was so full and sloshy. I was like, oh, that was too much. Like that was a good thought, but I over executed on that, in which I will always, say is like, don't overcorrect, right? So do something whenever you're like, oh, do I need more sodium? Don't take like two, whatever. Just take small and see if you start to feel better. Then do more, right? Don't overcorrect. So I got a few miles in on my run and I missed my nutrition. So I should have had nutrition at about 20 minutes in on the run and I missed it. And then I got to the aid station and the volunteer looked at me. She was like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Oh God, I'm like, I don't feel good. But if this gel doesn't go in, I'm not gonna finish. So I just need a little, like, I gotta get it in." And so she was like, "All right, we got this." And this volunteer was like, "Come on, Ann, you can do it." And so I tore it open, I got it in, and I got like, I would say about 80% of this gel in. I'm like, okay, right? And then and honestly, but in about 2 or 3 minutes, I was like, Thank goodness. That was the best thing. I just needed to get it in. My stomach was sour, but I knew I needed to push it in. So, hopefully you're not in that situation, but you want to have an awareness that if you miss your nutrition, it's going to come back to you later on that run for sure. You're going to be in a deficit. So, now let's say I didn't get that gel in. I didn't have that awesome volunteer like cheering. It was so awesome. Um, so maybe now you're like, okay, I really can't. I can't get anything in. The last, I always say, try to stick to your fueling plan as best you can. If you really cannot stick to your fueling plan, there are other things that are out there on the course that might help you make it to the end. And so this is sort of a last resort, as I would say. I really would say, skip a nutrition and then get back on track as soon as you can is really is sort of the best. That said, skip a nutrition and get back on track. Your heart rate might be high. Like, try to evaluate like what stressor is pulling away from your digestion. Like, maybe, you did just come out of transition. Did you come out too fast? Were you running like, did your heart rate spike? Are you just in the blazing sun? You came off the bike, maybe you're getting a nice breeze. So try to figure out what's the stressor, why can't I digest, right? Did I just hit, I've practiced this should be fine. Try to figure out the stressor. If you really can't, they have other things on the course that I'm always like, don't touch it. Right? Last resort, they've got like flat Coke or broth. You might be able to get through toward the end of the race. So I know I've had, if you're in like the last, 10K of the race and you're starting to not feel good and there's no way you're going to be able to manage sticking with your race fueling plan and you can't figure out what to do to get back on track, you could grab a little Coke is really great to help settle your stomach. A little broth, maybe your electrolytes are out, that sodium rich broth might be the answer for you, or just even something that's not super, super sweet. One of the things that we also do build into race plans too is that we make sure that you get in a little bit of protein and a little bit of fat and a little bit of fiber, not so much because that will kind of get in the way of digestion, but it can kind of help just not have sugar going through your gut all day long on those long courses. So it can really kind of help keep you settled there. But you can take, some Coke or, maybe they've got a hard candy. I'm a big fan of menthol hard candies too, if you're racing. So try some of the alternates, but always, always last ditch effort, go to that stuff. Really do try to get back on, assess, make an adjustment, and then try to get back on your race fueling plan.
Okay. And now you're done. Let's say you finished
Now you're done.
within 30 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Recovery. That's part
Within
of it
30
too, right?
minutes, yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna have your recovery drink. We all, always have a recovery drink, some glutamine, about 5 grams of glutamine. You can put it right in that recovery drink if you want, and have that right away. Your body, is you know, confused to say the very least after you finish Ironman. Your physiology inside is like, what did we just do? And so we do, and it's depleted. We've depleted a lot of stuff. So get that recovery drink in right away. The sooner you can start your recovery, the sooner you start your recovery, right? Like, so we want our things to get back to par. When things are below par, that's when we start to have, sort of secondary issues, muscle cramping, that kind of thing. So you want to get your recovery drink in. Also, just because you hit the finish line, your body, the physiology didn't. There's so much going on. Your body's now going to try to put itself back together. So the recovery drink for sure. I'm always like, when I see like sometimes like they do like the lobster festival, I'm like, who is eating lobster right now? I was like, this is crazy. It's like I couldn't do it. So I recommend very easily digestible foods like pretzels, things that are, if you can manage another, carb that's, not like a gel, right? So like some more, pretzels or a bagel, cinnamon raisin bagel is sort of a nice thing. But recovery drink first in about 30 minutes, and then maybe start grazing on some pretzels. Then maybe, an hour or so later, like a cinnamon raisin bagel. If you're doing a half, you might finish, with reasonable time left in the day where, keep that recovery process going. I like to throw in some green tea, vitamin C, some branched chain amino acids into that recovery plan. But really kind of go slow. And I wouldn't eat a meal after a race, like a solid meal, for about like 3 hours or so. Can you do it? Can you eat that lobster right away? Sure. But that's not what your physiology is looking for at that moment in time. It does not want to go break down proteins, invest energy into breaking down proteins and fats in a full meal. It really just wants those carbohydrates, a little bit of amino acid, to put in there. So, and now that I said that, I'm going to just go through that in my head to outline it, if we don't mind. So you're going to do your recovery drink with a little bit of glutamine in there, about 30 minutes. Then we're going to do some pretzels, and you might throw in a bagel, and that's about an hour after. And then you might do 2 scoops of like whey protein to get the protein in, but that your body doesn't have to break down. And then you could start to think about maybe 3 hours after your, half. You could start to think about a meal. And then depending on the length of your Ironman, I always say get to that point, right? Like get to where you've had some pretzels and your bagel and scoops of protein, vitamin C, an omega-3 supplement, and then that might be it for you. And then you're going, go to the finish line maybe. And then I would say wake up in the morning and have the yummy, egg, your egg sandwich, which is going to taste so good, because you'll be up at 4 in the morning with all your sugar and caffeine coursing through your body. So I would do that. So if you do finish your Ironman, earlier in the day, I would put about, 4 hours between your finish and a full meal.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. This is awesome. Just great advice. And I mean, it's one of those things. I mean, as triathletes, we put in our time, swim, bike, run. Just talked to Jenny Hansen about how we have to fit strength training in terms of all of that too. But then, I mean, the race fueling piece of it, I mean, it doesn't matter how much you swim, bike, and run. If you don't feel right,
Yeah.
I mean, your race is done. It's cooked. So, and
I
this is something you can do, you're in control of. So there's no good excuse not to get it done right.
I cannot say that enough. I can't stress it enough that it is within your control. It's part of, I mean, like Jenny's awesome, and her strength, like she's right. We've got to get in. We've got to make sure that we're not winding up with, injuries when we're doing, work that's this way. We have to, get our strength workout and get our lateral stuff in there too. And I love all of Jenny's advice on her strength training plans. But it's the same thing. Like you've got to get that in. It's part of the gig. You've got to get in your, if you want it to go well, right? Just
Yeah.
depends. How well do you want it to go? If you want it to go well, I would strongly recommend like nailing down your race nutrition as soon as you can and practice it. Even when we give a like a race fueling plan, but minimum, I want my athlete to go out like on key workouts and practice 3 times so that we make sure that what we, decided on paper is what should be executed in real life, right? And then they become familiar with it and how to adjust it on the fly too. But I can't tell you how many times athletes have come to me and be like, I don't know what happened. And then they tell me what they ate before, the day before, or or during the race. And I'm like, well, I will tell you what happened. Like we got to fix this. So, absolutely. I think race fueling is key. And I really like, I think from the get-go, our organization has really been, a big proponent of like, hey, yes, we've got the training here, but this, your nutrition is a huge cornerstone. So we need to incorporate that.
Yeah.
Can't say it enough.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. Really appreciate the time that you took tonight to talk about this very important topic. And hopefully people listen to what you have to say.
I do too. I absolutely hope they listen to what I have to say. And thank you so much for having me. Something I'm clearly very passionate about. I love talking about it. So, Anytime you want to talk sports nutrition, I'm in.